What happens when a man's cruelty is laid bare in front of his closest friends, and his wife's bold stand shatters the silence of years? On a warm Saturday night, in a cozy suburban home, laughter and cards filled the air until Tom's shocking act of disrespect stunned everyone at the table. But it was her unflinching response, raw with courage and quiet power, that turned a single moment into a life-changing reckoning, leaving his friends speechless and her future forever changed. This is a story of breaking free, finding strength, and reclaiming a life worth living, proof that the smallest spark can ignite the greatest change. It was a warm Saturday evening in a small suburban house, the kind with neatly trimmed hedges, and a porch swing that creaked just a little under the weight of time. Inside, laughter spilled out from the living room where 5 friends gathered around a card table, their voices mingling with the clink of beer bottles and the rustle of potato chip bags. I sat quietly in the corner, perched on a faded armchair, watching my husband Tom deal the cards with that charming grin he always wore in public. He was the life of the party, always quick with a joke, always ready to refill a glass, his charisma filling the room like a warm breeze. But I knew the other side of him, the side that didn't show up when others were around, the side that left me feeling small and invisible. Tonight, though, that side slipped out, raw and undeniable, and what I did next left everyone speechless. Their laughter replaced by a stunned silence that would linger long after the night was over. The evening had started like any other game night, a ritual that had become as familiar as the creak of that porch swing. Tom's friends Mike, Dave, Sarah, and Lisa had been coming over for years, their bond forged in the late-night haze of college parties and carried into adulthood through these monthly poker games. They were a tight-knit group, each with their own quirks, Mike with his loud laugh that could shake the walls, Dave with his quiet intensity as he studied his cards, Sarah with her quick wit, and Lisa with her knack for diffusing tension with a well-timed joke. I usually played the role of the perfect hostess, setting out bowls of nachos and pretzels, keeping the fridge stocked with beer, and smiling through Tom's occasional sharp comments. "Babe, you forgot the chips again," he'd say, his voice loud enough to carry across the room, his tone half joking but with an edge that cut deeper than anyone else seemed to notice. I'd laugh it off, like always, brushing it aside with a smile that felt more like a mask. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, maybe because I'd had a grueling day at work, my feet aching from hours on my feet at the office, or maybe because I was just tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of carrying the weight of his words and actions alone. The game was in full swing when it happened, the room alive with the familiar rhythm of their banter. Cards slapped against the table, chips clinked as bets were raised, and the smell of melted cheese from the nachos I'd just warmed up hung in the air. I was in the kitchen, grabbing another tray of snacks, when Tom's voice cut through the noise. "Hey, where's my drink? You're slacking tonight." His friends chuckled, used to his teasing, their laughter a reflex to his charm. But something in me snapped, a quiet breaking point after years of swallowing my hurt. I set the tray down on the counter, my hands trembling slightly, and walked back into the living room. The words came before I could stop them. "Tom, not your maid." My voice was calm but firm, cutting through the laughter like a knife. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the space. Tom's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing for a split second, and I thought he'd laugh it off like he always did, brushing it away with a joke. But then he stood up, his face hardening, and before I could react, he gave me a quick, sharp kick under the table. It wasn't hard enough to bruise, but it was deliberate, a calculated move to put me in my place, to remind me who was in control. The room froze. Mike's cards slipped from his hand, fluttering to the table. Sarah's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with shock. Lisa looked away, her fingers tightening around her beer bottle, and Dave just stared at Tom, his face a mix of disbelief and something close to betrayal. I could have cried. I could have stormed out, slamming the door behind me, letting the tears I'd held back for years finally spill over. But instead, I stood there, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears, and something inside me shifted, like a lock, clicking open after being stuck for too long. I wasn't going to let this slide, not this time, not in front of his friends, not in the house we'd built together. I looked at Tom, his face now a mix of defiance and embarrassment, his cheeks flushed as he realized everyone had seen what he'd done. "You think that's okay?" I said, my voice steady, louder than I expected, carrying every ounce of hurt I'd bottled up for years. "Doing that in front of your friends? Kicking me like I'm nothing?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unignorable. The room stayed silent, the weight of my words pressing down on everyone. Tom tried to laugh, his voice shaky as he muttered, "Come on, it was just a joke." But no one laughed with him. His friends exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable, their eyes darting between us. They weren't used to seeing this side of him, the side I'd lived with for years. But I was done hiding it, done pretending everything was fine for the sake of his image. I didn't yell or scream. I didn't need to. I walked over to the coffee table, my steps deliberate, and picked up the deck of cards, their edges worn from years of these nights. I held them for a moment, feeling the texture under my fingers, and then I tossed them gently into the air. They scattered across the floor, some landing in the dip bowl, others sliding under the couch. A quiet chaos that mirrored the moment. "Game's over," I said, my voice calm but firm, each word landing like a stone. "You all know what he did, and I'm not pretending it didn't happen." Mike opened his mouth to say something, his face a mix of confusion and guilt, but I held up my hand. "No, Mike, you don't get to smooth this over. You saw it. You all saw it." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the floor, her lips pressed tight. Lisa whispered, "I'm so sorry," her voice barely audible, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Dave just shook his head, his gaze locked on Tom, his expression saying what words didn't need to. He was seeing his friend in a new light, and it wasn't a flattering one. Tom's face turned red, his jaw tight, and he tried to play it off again. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, but his voice cracked, and I could tell he was rattled, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of his friend's stares. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I walked to the front door, my steps steady despite the storm in my chest, and opened it wide. The cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. "I think it's time for everyone to go," I said, my voice even but unyielding. No one protested. They grabbed their coats, avoiding Tom's eyes. Their movements slow and awkward, like they were waking up from a dream they didn't want to be in. Sarah gave my arm a gentle squeeze as she passed, her eyes soft with understanding, whispering, "You don't deserve that." I nodded, holding back the tears that were starting to burn behind my eyes. Lisa hesitated at the door, her face pale, and said, "I didn't know he was like that." Dave was the last to leave, pausing to look back at Tom, his expression unreadable, before stepping outside. When the door closed, it was just me and Tom, the silence louder than any argument we'd ever had, the air thick with everything we hadn't said for years. He tried to apologize, stumbling over his words, his hands gesturing wildly as he paced the living room. "I didn't mean it. Okay. It was just a stupid moment," he said, his voice desperate, but I wasn't ready to hear it. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my arms crossed, and looked at him, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. "You don't get to decide what hurts me," I told him, my voice quiet but firm. "Not anymore." I turned and walked upstairs, my steps slow and deliberate, and locked the bedroom door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking but my mind clear, the weight of years lifting even as my heart ached. For so long, I'd made excuses for him, told myself it wasn't that bad, that he didn't mean it, that I could fix things, if I just tried harder. But that kick, in front of his friends, in our home, was a line he couldn't uncross. It wasn't just about the pain, it was about the disrespect, the humiliation, the years of small cuts that had finally bled me dry. I wasn't just hurt, I was done. The next morning, I woke up early, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I made coffee, the familiar routine grounding me, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the backyard where the morning light painted the grass gold. I called a lawyer, not to make a scene or to get revenge, but because I deserved better. I deserved a life where I wasn't afraid of the person I loved, where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. It wasn't a dramatic decision, not like in the movies where everything happens in a blaze of anger or tears. It was quiet, resolute, a choice made in the stillness of a new day. I didn't tell Tom right away. I needed time to figure out what came next, to rebuild the parts of myself I'd let slip away. Word spread quickly, as it does in small towns. By the next weekend, Tom's friends stopped calling him. Sarah texted me, her message simple but kind. "Are you okay? I'm here if you need me." Dave sent a longer message, his words careful but honest, saying he'd had no idea things were like that he felt ashamed for not noticing sooner. They didn't know the half of it, the years of quiet slights, the way Tom's words could cut without leaving a mark. But that moment in the living room had opened their eyes. It wasn't just about the kick, it was about the truth it revealed, the crack in the facade Tom had built so carefully. I didn't tell them everything, didn't need to. They'd seen enough to understand, and their silence toward Tom spoke. Louder than any words could. Tom moved out a month later, his belongings packed into a few cardboard boxes, his face a mix of resignation and regret. I heard through mutual friends that he was trying to work on himself, seeing a therapist, maybe even joining a support group. I didn't care, not out of anger, but because I was too busy rediscovering who I was without him. I started painting, again, something I hadn't done since we got married. My brushes moving across the canvas with a freedom I'd forgotten I had. I redecorated the house, painting the walls in warm yellows and soft blues, colors that made me feel alive. I replaced the old card table with a small dining set, a place for new memories, and hosted a game night of my own, inviting coworkers and neighbors who didn't make me feel small. We played Scrabble instead of poker, the room filled with laughter, and the clink of wine glasses, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was home. Looking back, that night wasn't just about a kick, not just about a single moment of cruelty exposed. It was about me finding my voice, standing up, and refusing to let someone else define my worth. It wasn't dramatic or flashy, not the kind of story that makes headlines or goes viral. It was real, raw, human. I thought about the years I'd spent tiptoeing around Tom's temper, the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was enough, the mornings I'd pasted on a smile to keep the peace. That night, scattering those cards across the floor, I wasn't just ending a game, I was ending a cycle I was choosing myself, not with fanfare or vengeance, but with quiet determination. Sometimes, the smallest moments, the ones that seem insignificant to others, are the ones that change everything. For me, it was a card game, a scattered deck, and a door I finally opened not just for his friends to leave, but for me to start living again. And as I sat on that porch swing weeks later, the creak of familiar comfort, I realized that freedom doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes, it's as quiet as a single step forward into a life that's finally yours.